dollar. Dirt and money, no soul. Had to go and get it, ain't no time to kick it. Got a stack of flip for my foes. Dollar. Please tell me you can hear me. Don't turn your back and don't neglect me. Just let me know if you need me. Dollar. Let me watch out for my partners. Keep my money long, get my team strong. Let me run away from my problems.
Yo, what's good, original crew? It's your boy DJ New here, your girl.
Sierra Nicole.
We're back on the channel with another Mr. Ballen for y'all today, man. We got this man's secret shocked the world. Yo, this was a requesting one, and we was getting ready to record, so we was like, hey, might as well do what you ask.
Yep.
Deliver and
ask, and you shall receive.
Not all the time. Not all the time. Don't beat the head up like this. Don't.
Ask and you may receive.
May. But with that being said, we ain't gonna hold y'all, man. We're gonna go ahead and get into it. But before we do, make sure you check out the links in the description box.
Down below.
You already know where to go, man. You want the first part, all you gotta do is check out down below. Also, if you enjoyed today's video, we always say lock it in with a thumbs up.
Please.
Let us know, man. But, you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, let's go ahead and get into it. Let's check it out. Let's see what it's about, y'all.
For over 20 years, a person in Austria kept a horrible secret. And in 2008, that secret was inadvertently revealed and it shocked the world. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload 3 or 4 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, invite the like button to come over to your house for a family dinner party, and then proceed to serve them a severely oversalted dish. But before they take a bite, be sure to tell them you're so proud of your cooking and you can't wait to get their feedback. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's story. On August 28th, 1984, an 18-year-old girl named Elizabeth went missing. On the first day she was gone...
Sorry. I need my dates.
1984. I'm going to remember that. 1984, baby.
I'm just saying, because y'all know we always asking about dates and ages. So I'm just saying, man.
On August 28th, 1984, an 18-year-old girl named Elizabeth went missing. On the first day she was gone, her friends and family went out looking for her, but they couldn't find her. The following day, when she still hadn't shown up and no one had heard from her, her parents went to the local police station in their Austrian town of Amstetten, which is about an hour west of Vienna, and they reported her missing. The police launched an initial search of the town and the surrounding areas, but after several weeks, they had found nothing that connected to Elizabeth and where she might have gone. A month after she had been reported missing, her parents came back to the police station, except this time they were carrying a note they say they received in the mail from their missing daughter. It was postmarked from a town that was about 2 hours west of Amstetten, and in this note, Elizabeth writes directly to her parents, and she tells them that she had grown tired of living with them, and she did not want them to come looking for her, and if she discovered they were looking for her, she would just flee the country. After the police read the note, they asked the parents if they thought it was real, if this was a legitimate letter from their daughter, and they said, yeah, they think it is. And then after that, her father, Joseph, suggested that maybe his daughter had run off to join a cult. That was something he thought she was getting into before her disappearance. After the parents left the police station, the police began conducting interviews with other family members and friends of Elizabeth to see if it was possible that she might have run off to join a cult. And virtually everyone they spoke to said, absolutely not. There is no way she ran off to join a cult. That just wasn't her. She was a quiet, reserved person, and they had never heard her talking about a cult or anything that even resembled a cult. These answers left the police feeling very suspicious of the whole situation, and so they decided to look into the young woman's history to see if there was some other reason she might have run off. In their research, they discovered that Elizabeth was one of 7 siblings that all lived together with their parents, Joseph and Rose Marie. Joseph was a successful electrical engineer and real estate developer who was well liked and respected in town, and Rose Marie had gotten married very young at the age of 17, and she had stayed home to take care of the kids. By all accounts, from the outside looking in, they were a very ordinary family. But as the police began to dig deeper and deeper into their history, they discovered there were some big problems behind closed doors. Despite his friendly, outward public appearance, Joseph was actually a ruthless authoritarian when he was home alone with his family. At night, when he came home from work, his wife and his kids would immediately stop whatever they were doing and go silent in hopes they might avoid a beating. The only member of the family that seemed willing to stand up to Joseph was Elizabeth, and she and her father would frequently get into screaming fights, and then as punishment for these fights, Joseph would not only beat his daughter, he would also prevent her from seeing her friends for long periods of time, and he would go through her personal things like her diary. Their toxic relationship finally came to a head when Elizabeth finally ran away from home 2 years prior to her most recent disappearance. She made it all the way to Vienna before authorities caught up to her and brought her back home. Upon learning about this earlier disappearance, the police became convinced that the most recent disappearance was yet another attempt to escape her abusive and controlling father. And so the police decided that this was more of a family affair, and they didn't push the investigation further. A year went by, and neither the police nor her family heard anything from Elizabeth, and so her case was closed. But 24 years later...
How can you close a case?
Without even
Like,
finding, making sure she
nothing.
good, making sure she alive, making sure something.
Y'all don't have enough information to close the case. Like, that, no, you don't do that. Like, the fuck? That don't sit right with me, though.
Yeah.
That part.
Family heard anything from Elizabeth, and so her case was closed. But 24 years later, a seemingly unconnected event broke her case wide open. On April 19th, 2008, a 19-year-old named Kirsten was rushed to the hospital in Amstetten. Her skin was so pale it looked almost transparent. She was unconscious and suffering from seizures as well as lung and kidney failure. The doctors were able to stabilize her by putting her into a medically induced coma, but after running a litany of tests, they couldn't figure out what was causing her to have this medical condition, and so they were not able to treat her effectively. They assumed it had to be some sort of genetic condition, so they put her name into the medical database, but nothing came up. Her name wasn't listed. And so this was very perplexing because everybody's name was in this database. And so they took her name and they ran it in other medical databases, and her name didn't show up in any of them. And so totally confused by this girl who seemingly didn't exist, who was exhibiting symptoms of a condition none of the doctors had seen before, the doctors decide they have to speak to the guy she showed up with, an older man who was out in the waiting room. When the doctors approached him, he said he was Kirsten's grandfather, but beyond that, he offered virtually no new information. In fact, he was aggressive and rude and dismissive, and anytime they asked him questions, he would answer as minimally as possible. And when the doctors really fixated on whether or not Kirsten had some underlying medical condition, he would not give them an answer. He would just dismiss it and say he didn't know anything, but it was the doctor's impression that he did know something, he just didn't want to tell them. And this behavior shocked them because they're thinking the information he has could potentially save his granddaughter's life. Why wouldn't he want to give it to us? And so after this disastrous interaction with the grandfather, the doctors decide to get the police involved. There were just too many red flags not to. When the police arrived, they were surprised to find out that this older man in the waiting room was none other than Joseph, the father of the still missing girl, Elizabeth. The police asked Joseph,
Jeez, content clues. We done seen this happen so many times. You know, you thinking what I'm thinking?
I'm thinking something. I'm thinking something, but I don't want to go there yet. What you thinking?
It's a made for lifetime type thing. You thinking?
Are we thinking the same?
Possible.
what's going on here? And he tells them that earlier that day, he had opened his front door of his house, and lying on his front step was a girl he had never seen before. It was Kirsten, and there was a note laying on her from his missing daughter, Elizabeth. In the note, Elizabeth writes to Joseph directly and tells him, this girl here is Kirsten, and she is my daughter, so she's your granddaughter, and she's sick, and I can't take care of her. Can you and Mom take her to the hospital? While the police had many more questions about this totally bizarre turn of events, they realized that for the time being, they needed to focus their efforts on just getting Elizabeth to contact them, because they needed to know more about Kirsten's medical condition so they could save her life. And so the police went to the media and they put out a message on TV and on radio that was a direct appeal to Elizabeth that basically said, we need you to come forward as soon as possible and speak to us so we can help save your daughter's life. And all the messages worked, because a week later, Elizabeth, along with her father Joseph, showed up at the hospital where Kirsten was staying. When when doctors asked, Joseph did not get into detail about how he actually located Elizabeth. He simply said he found her and now she wants to see her daughter. The doctors noticed that Elizabeth, who was supposed to be in her early 40s, looked like she could easily be in her 60s. Her hair was completely white and her skin was so pale it was almost transparent, just like they had noticed about her daughter's skin. And so after they checked in, Joseph and Elizabeth made their way to Kirsten's room, and the pair went inside, and the doctors that were in there would say that Elizabeth looked terrified. She was hunched over and kind of slouched down, and she wouldn't make eye contact with any of the doctors. And as she was standing there looking at her terribly sick daughter, the doctors began asking her, do you know of any underlying health problems your daughter might have that might help us treat her more effectively? And Elizabeth was so scared she couldn't even talk. And at some point, the questions became too much for her, and she just turned around and walked out into the hall with Joseph. And once they got out into the hall, the police were waiting for them. They had been tipped off as soon as the doctors saw Joseph and Elizabeth come into the hospital. Elizabeth and Joseph were detained and brought to the police station, where they were put in 2 separate rooms to be interviewed. They first interviewed Elizabeth, and initially, just like in the hospital room, she was totally mute and didn't say anything. Then for 5 hours, the police grilled her with questions. Where had she been for the last 24 years? What happened to Kirsten? Did she have something to do with her illness? And they kept reminding her throughout these 5 hours that if she never gave them any information, and God forbid something were to happen to Kirsten, she, Elizabeth, could be held criminally liable. And so eventually Elizabeth, in a very small, meek voice, said, okay, I'll tell you the story, but you have to promise me I never have to see my father, Joseph, ever again. When she said this,
It's what I'm thinking.
I think it's what I'm thinking too.
It's what I'm thinking. And do we want to go ahead and say? Or wait till... I'll go ahead and say, because it could be wrong. But what I'm thinking is the dad kidnapped her, right? Technically, he kidnapped his own daughter. The dad has kind of like kidnapped and holding her captive. Held her captive. That's all these years. And had a kid with his daughter.
And he's been...
That's the reason why they were so pale. They've been kept in a dark enclosed...
for all these years.
Also, the reason why it seems as though she's aged and she's pale. They're not outside getting sunlight. They're
and
not
she's
outside.
So mute because she hasn't even
she's
had
been killed for over
20
years
with anyone else.
And she's been threatened, probably beaten.
Yeah. And of course, other things. But
And that's the reason why there's no records of the granddaughter.
Of the granddaughter because she's not in the system.
It's a hidden child.
Yeah. It's sad.
Police, they could tell she was so scared that they said, okay, fine. You never have to see your father again. We'll make sure of it. Now tell us what happened. After that, Elizabeth clutched her hands. She took a deep breath. And then she told them one of the most horrifying stories they had ever heard. A story so disturbing that it would make headlines all around the world for months. It all began 24 years earlier on August 28th, 1984, the day Elizabeth went missing. On that day, she told police she was at her family home in Amstetten when her father asked her to come into the basement to help him with something. Her father, for the last several years, had been constructing a bomb shelter in their basement, and he was now only one door installation away from being done. At the time, in the early 1980s, the Cold War was still very much on, and so building bomb shelters inside of your home was a relatively common thing. So Elizabeth goes down into her basement and she sees her father standing in front of this empty frame where this door is going to go that leads into the shelter. And so she walks over and steps through the frame into the shelter. She turns around and her father hands her this door and she holds it in the middle of the frame while he secures it to the hinges. And then once it's securely in place, suddenly he swings open the door, knocking Elizabeth backwards farther into the shelter. And before she could stand back up again, her father had run inside and pushed an ether-soaked towel onto her face, knocking her unconscious. When she came to again, she found herself chained up in the very back room of the shelter. It would turn out this bomb shelter that Joseph had spent 6 years constructing was not actually a bomb shelter. It was a prison he was building specifically for Elizabeth. To get into this shelter, you would have to go down the steps into the basement, which looked like a typical unfinished basement. And then on the far wall, you would see these shelves that had things like paint cans and screwdrivers and other tools you would expect to find in a basement. But if you walked over to the left side of the shelving, there was a lock on the back of it that if you undid it, the shelf itself would swing out like a door, and then behind it on the wall would reveal a 3-foot tall secret secret door. This secret door was also locked, but not by a key lock. Instead, it was locked by a keypad lock that only Joseph had the code to. And since Joseph was an electrical engineer, he took great care in ensuring this lock never could be tampered with or destroyed. That thing was going to stay locked unless he unlocked it. When Joseph entered his code into the keypad, he could open that secret door and it would reveal this secret underground prison that was basically a winding maze of small rooms with ceilings that were too short to be able to stand up all the way in. If you walked through this secret door and actually entered into this prison, you would start by entering this soundproof narrow hallway that went on for several feet before it entered into this very small bathroom area where the bathroom was unbelievably cramped and there was no doors, there was no privacy. And then if you didn't stop in the bathroom and you just kept walking straight through that first hallway, you would reach another hallway that was totally soundproof and narrow, and at the end of that hallway, it would feed into a very small bedroom that was so small that it barely contained the one bed that was inside of it, and then off to the right side of that bedroom was another door that led into a similarly sized bedroom. All of
That is so messed
My
up.
heart
bro.
is like pounding like so bad.
That
like
is so messed up, dude. Like,
how can you do that to your own child?
and like I said, this is like a Lifetime movie type thing.
Yes.
Like, this is only thing you see like on TV, but it's something that happens in real life.
And you didn't like the fact that she's the only one that
was
had
rebellious.
the guts to stand up to you.
Yeah, so
You know what I'm saying? So you like, oh, okay, I'm gonna
And
teach you.
how long he said he worked on this?
For 6 years. For 6 years.
Because she ran away 2 years prior from this.
from the home, and then
So he had been plotting. He had been plotting this for a long time. And he was like, I can't stand you, but I got something coming for you.
walls of this underground prison were made of thick reinforced concrete. That, combined with the soundproofing that Joseph had installed throughout the entire prison, meant no one could hear Elizabeth's cries for help. Also, the inside of the prison was heavily monitored by Joseph's security system. So truly, Elizabeth had absolutely no privacy. She was completely trapped, and the only way she was getting out was if her father freed her. For the first 5 years of her imprisonment, she remained in that dungeon all alone. Her only connection to the outside world was her father, who would come down almost every night to drop off basic supplies and to assault her. As far as Joseph's wife and his other kids knew, he was just spending all this time in the basement because that's where he worked when he was not at the office. In 1988, Elizabeth became pregnant with her father's child. She was terrified of the pregnancy and begged Joseph to at least allow her to deliver the child in a hospital. But he refused. He wasn't willing to potentially expose himself for what he was doing. And so he gave her a book about childbirth, and he gave her a pair of scissors to cut the umbilical cord, and he said, good luck. And so on August 30th, Elizabeth delivered her daughter, Kirsten, alone in that basement. Following the birth of Kirsten, Elizabeth would deliver 6 more of her father's children, all the same way she delivered Kirsten, alone and in the basement. In 1996, one of Elizabeth's newborn babies, Michael, was born with respiratory issues, and so Elizabeth pleaded with Joseph to take the baby to the hospital to get help, but Joseph refused. He was worried he would be exposed. And so 3 days after his birth, the baby died in Elizabeth's arms. And after the baby died, Joseph just took the body, threw it in a stove, and incinerated it like it was nothing. In the late 90s, the 6 living children down in the basement were getting bigger and noisier, and so Joseph came up with a plan in order to reduce the chances of them being discovered. And so one day, Joseph went downstairs into the basement, and he took one of Elizabeth's youngest children away from her. And then he threatened her and the rest of the kids down there that if they tried to fight back or if they ever tried to escape, he would seal off the basement and he would gas them to death. Previously, Joseph had punished the entire family by turning off their power and cutting off their food and water supply for multiple days at a time, so they knew he was willing and able to hurt them if he wanted to. And so when he took this young child away from Elizabeth, they didn't put up a fight, and the baby disappeared upstairs. And when Joseph's wife, Rosemary, came home, he put on this elaborate charade about how he had discovered this baby on the front step, and that there was a note attached to the baby, and it was from Elizabeth, their missing daughter, and this child child was apparently Elizabeth's and she couldn't take care of it, and she was leaving it here for he and Rosemary to raise it as their own. And Joseph had actually made Elizabeth write out this note and sign it to add credibility to the story. And so when Elizabeth's mother, Rosemary, saw this note and heard Joseph's story, she believed it. Over the next several years, Joseph would steal 2 more of Elizabeth's young children and then stage having found them on his front step with a note from Elizabeth. And with each discovered child, Rosemary amazingly never asked any questions. She just took these kids in and she and Joseph raised them as their own. Eventually, when these 3 kids got old enough, Joseph would tell them that their real mother, Elizabeth, was a lowlife and she had abandoned them and she didn't care about them, when in reality, their mother and their other 3 siblings they didn't know existed were locked up in the basement below their feet. Initially, investigators believed all of these children Joseph had with Elizabeth were all mistakes, but it would turn out that was not the case. Joseph would admit that the reason he initially imprisoned Elizabeth was because he wanted to completely control her. He wanted to own her. And so he decided that if he could just impregnate her as many times as possible and make her have all these kids, even if she eventually got out of the prison, no man would want her. She had too many kids, and so she would remain his property. And so over the entire time, Elizabeth...
You talking about a control mechanism? You talking about control? You talking about a weird father control? This is what you're talking about.
Facts.
This is what you call parenting failure.
My heart hurts so bad.
This ain't even parenting failure. This is just like,
it's just
you know how we be talking about how some parents be want to have obsession over their child's life so they can control every aspect of their kids' life. This is exactly what it is.
Beyond. This is beyond. This is sickening.
This some sick ass mess.
Wow.
She had too many kids, and so she would remain his property. And so over the entire time Elizabeth was imprisoned, over 2 decades, the nightly assaults by her father never slowed down. They happened thousands of times. But despite the horrific and tragic circumstances surrounding each of her children's births, she loved her children unconditionally and would spend all of her time doing her best to educate them and care for them. The 3 children that remained with her, that were not taken by Joseph, she taught them how to read and how to write. And when Joseph had given them a TV and a radio to keep down there, she would use those 2 items to try to teach her kids about the outside world, and she would promise them that someday they would get to experience it for real. Finally, in 2008, so 24 years after Elizabeth had originally been captured by her father, her oldest daughter, Kirsten, becomes extremely sick, and Elizabeth convinces Joseph to bring her to the hospital. And 1 week later, Joseph's heinous crimes were revealed to the world. Once police found out about the secret prison, they rushed to the house and they went downstairs and they used the codes and instructions that Joseph had given them, and they went inside and they freed the last 2 remaining children that were still there. When they brought them to the hospital, the youngest of these 2 kids, who was 5 years old, he didn't speak the entire time. He just pressed his face up against the glass of the car window and he stared out in utter amazement, because to that point in his life, he had never actually seen the world. After those 2 kids were brought to the hospital, they were reunited with the other 3 siblings that had been taken away from them years ago to live upstairs with Joseph and Rosemary. And apparently the reunion was very emotional and the kids were extremely happy to see each other. And then a couple days later, Kirsten would come out of her coma and she too would have a chance to be reunited with all of her siblings. Kirsten would ultimately make a full recovery. It would turn out she was suffering from a severe vitamin D deficiency. And vitamin D you primarily get from the sun, and in her 19 years of life, she had never been in the sun. As soon as the story broke about this family being trapped inside of this basement, everybody had the same question. How could Elizabeth's mother, Rosemary, not know what was going on in her basement? But the police had the same...
But I'll say this, the reason why she didn't know, he had control over her as well. Yep. He remember in the beginning, he probably beat her, treated her the same way he treated Elizabeth.
He was a monster in his home.
But
so
she
never
fell in line.
Yeah, she would never question. I would never question anything.
So
like that's her mentality.
He had control.
Whatever he tell me, that's what it is.
He had like
even with the original, with the note, the original note, the first one.
She probably questioned it.
Yeah, 9 times out of 10. But of course, I'm going with whatever he says.
Like, why all of a sudden, and then, like...
Yeah.
This mother, Rosemary, not know what was going on in her basement. But the police had the same suspicions about Rosemary, and they investigated her, and they ruled her out. And they said she's not at fault here, she's a victim too. She had been so badly abused by Joseph that she lived in fear of him. And so when he forbade her from ever going anywhere near the basement, she listened. And if she ever heard any strange sounds coming out of the basement, or if she ever suspected any strange behavior by Joseph, she kept those thoughts to herself because she was scared. It's also worth noting that in those 24 years that Elizabeth and her kids were trapped in the basement, Joseph had over 100 people rent out a room inside of his house that was right over the basement. And in those 24 years, not one of those tenants ever said Joseph was acting strangely or complained about strange noises coming from the basement. However, one tenant who was there for a 4-year stretch had a dog with him the whole time, and every night the dog at some point would suddenly stand up, its ears would prick up, and it would start growling like it heard or it saw something. And at first, this tenant would try to see what the dog had seen or heard, but after never seeing anything, he would always just dismiss the dog when it did this at night. Later on, when that tenant figured out what was actually happening inside the house while he was there, he realized his dog was most likely hearing the faint sounds of the family that was imprisoned right below him. After a year of therapy and rehabilitation, Elizabeth and her 6 kids were given new identities by the Austrian government, and they were sent off to a secret location to start their lives over. As such, there's virtually no information about how they're doing today. However, anonymous sources have come forward and said the family has successfully reintegrated into society, and they are all leading relatively normal and happy lives. As for Joseph, he was quickly given a life sentence, and today he is one of the most hated people in his prison due to the nature of his crimes. He is so hated that in 2016, when he was out in general population, he was attacked by other inmates and had several of his teeth knocked out. And so now prison officials are worried if they leave him in general population, he'll be killed, and so he spends virtually all of his time in solitary confinement. He will be eligible for parole in 2024 when he is 89 years old. So that's going to do it, guys. If you found the secret in today's episode, let us know in the comments what it is and where you found it, so give us the timestamp.
But this whole case is just mind blowing. Like to say, and I think I'll say this as well. Things like this happen too often. Like we hear stories like this too often. You do hear
like stories, yeah.
And it's at the point where it's getting crazy. Like what's wrong with the world, to be real? Because this is one reason why I kept saying it's like made for it's like a Lifetime movie. Yeah. It's because I remember this one situation. I don't remember if it was Lifetime or what, but he kept her in the. He had kidnapped this girl and kept her basically in his yard, but it was in his shed, and he had a secret compartment in the shed, and he kept her in. It was like a garage shed, but nobody knew all these years she was back there. And then you always have the situation where they end up having a child by this person, and they end up raising the child in this. And I'm just, because even with the one in Ohio, same situation. He kidnapped the girl. But in that situation, he kidnapped multiple girls, had them down there, and he had kids with them. But it's just like, bro, it's so many situations like this. And to be real, the police kind of failed this one too. Law enforcement failed this situation because reason why I say they failed them in this situation, they gave up on the case too soon. And anytime there's a report that there has been a runaway, one of the biggest things you should do is go and search the whole house. Because if you search the whole house, y'all wouldn't for any kind of clue or evidence. Because y'all saying it's a runaway, even though you always try to rule out the fact that is there a possibility that somebody took her? Let's check the basement, even because there could be some evidence in the basement. Yeah. Maybe. Well, to be honest, he hit that door. Yeah, he hit the door.
And then I'm thinking, I'm like, was it also because y'all kind of like, okay, well, she's 18. Did y'all?
It was the fact that she had prior.
Well, yeah, I get that, but I'm saying with them just closing the case, I don't know if it was just because of course I don't know how the law and how long y'all can keep things, whatever.
Especially in that country.
And then the fact that she was 18, I don't know if y'all was just like, okay, well, it doesn't seem like there's any foul play involved or anything, but you don't really know because you really haven't investigated too much. But of course, we don't know the full like details because it was what it said after a year they closed the case. Maybe I don't know. So it's just so sad. Yeah, it's just sad. It's like super sad. Like throughout it, I kind of got emotional because I was in my head. I just couldn't fathom the fact that a father, a parent.
But that's
a parent,
that's
period. I know, but it's just like I guess because I don't think like that and I don't have those sick tendencies. I just couldn't
imagine yourself doing something like
around
that.
People doing stuff like that.
Yeah.
And just to think of all the victims, so many victims, many victims. Her other siblings, her kids, the mom. Like really?
Facts, bro.
You know what I'm saying?
You took this girl away from her mom, her siblings, her friends.
Her friends.
Those are all victims from that point.
You
and
know
then
what I'm saying?
she was the main victim, but they all became victims as well.
As well.
And then you turn around and you have 6 more victims of her. For one, the 3 kids you took away from her, they're a victim because they never got the relationship of their biological mother. And then you took that away from them. But also you keep the other 3 in captivity. They're becoming victims of that and victim of the fact that they're not even able to have the relationship they need to have with their siblings
and with their mom. You know what I'm saying?
Like,
you robbed
so
them of so much, especially like you said, the 3 that you took up or whatever. You're not. I'm not supposed to tell you. Were you educating them? Were
and
you
then
probably
the brainwashing you did to make them think so foul
that
of
their
their
mom.
mother. So are they even able to think otherwise about her? But I'll say this: they possibly can because the daughter that was in the hospital, she was the oldest. She's 19. Yeah. She's always been there with the mom. So they have the closest bond. So because they the ones who've been in there the longest. Everyone else, I feel like they can be able to transition back into a healthy relationship. Yeah. Because at the end of the day, they all are still young. Yeah. They're not adults, full adults.
Right. So that's the brighter, side of it. And then also I also feel for like you were being like super selfish because you didn't want to get caught like with the other baby that was having the issues and you're just like, nope, not getting the baby any help. And just let the baby.
And then you burnt the baby.
Just put the baby in the oven, like okay.
That is crazy.
Let's move on with life. That's
like you
so
really
crazy.
Like how can you burn a? And you know how long you have to keep a baby in there to turn them like to kill them like that. And what the mom didn't in the residence, y'all didn't. Now that part, y'all had to peep something because there wasn't no odor or nothing in the house.
Well, we don't know exactly where he went and did we don't.
They did it in they stove.
Like
in the house. Come on,
you know what I'm saying? Like, but yeah, I get that. I get what you're saying.
And they had to rule out the mom. They had to rule out the mom because so many situations the mother has some kind of involvement in these type of things. So they had to rule out the mom, but the mom was also a victim for so many years. Definitely. And she probably was a victim before they even had kids. Yeah. Because that type of thing just doesn't happen overnight. That's a year of abuse. So, man, I'm glad they were able to get away.
Yeah.
He doesn't need to be set free because at least you have to do, at least you have to do over there 25 years as well. And then we're going to add on the years of them kids as well. So, you had her down there for 24. You gotta do 24 years in the cell. Yeah. Add them kids years because that's the amount of years they had to deal with in the cell. So, 19. And we just know about the 19-year-old and the 5. Technically, you got murder on your hand, too, because you put that baby, the sick baby died. But you still got there's still a murder on your hand as well. So, I don't know, man.
I don't know. But this was a sad story. This was super, super sad.
Yeah, facts, man.
And sickening.
But, hey, with that being said, make sure y'all spam us up in the comments. Let us know y'all thoughts and opinions in the comment section down below, man. But as always, y'all know how it go. I do go by the name of kiddandceemgmt. We are y'all.
Go and get it, ain't no time to kick it. Got a stack of flip for my foes. Dollar. Please tell me you can hear me. Don't turn your back